of the preeminent teachings that's in the New Testament. And Samaritans were not liked. They were considered half-breeds. So there's like this racial difference, and as well as a religious difference between the two. So, and just to use that as an example. And what was the point of the parable other than expanding your circle of love and care and compassion? No, so not like, we're going to send you thoughts and prayers while you're lying there in the ditch.
Right.
But actually touching the person, which made that was problematic. You got to pay for it. You're taking this guy over there to and paying somebody to feed him and take care of him while he heals and recovers. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Are you willing to do something where it might be financial and it goes, it's a different culture than you are, for somebody else? It's the broadening of the circle. Are you willing to care for somebody else? And it comes into play in immigration. It comes into play with the way you drive. So there's another person who cut you off. and it's just like, are they just a person who cut you off, or are they a person?
Right.
Who perhaps is in a hurry for a reason unknown to you? How do you think about that while you're in the car, having just been cut off?
So my guest today is Art Suggs. We've been talking about the relationship between church and state, and the tenuous relationship that the church has with the state. We've related it to the church remaining to be wanting to have a distance between the states, so that it can be the conscience of the state, or religion in general is the conscience of the state. And so by remaining separated, we can influence prophetically as well as morally the conversation that goes on in the world. Now, Alexis de Tocqueville, let's go back to that.
Okay. Yeah.
He had a very interesting way of approaching the issue of religion and state. He, in his book on democracy in America, he posited that religion had to remain one of the three legs of the stool, to remain for us to remain democratic. Now, when we get away from freedom of conscience, especially, we get into a place where the state is controlling the conscience of the church. So that they have vested interest in trying to keep our thinking going along one particular way. And so one of the things that I always decry is the fact that they say stuff like, when we have prayer in school, or if we have prayer inside of the governmental area, we're inviting God into our thinking, or into our deliberation. But are we really? I mean, that's the question that I always get from that. Is God really a part of the deliberation just because we say a prayer in there? Or especially when we think about a budget, for instance. So the budget we say, all right, we're inviting God's wisdom into our thinking, but then the entire conversation that comes from there is cutting entitlement spending, getting away with Social Security, harming the poor, harming the alien, and the conversation isn't really doing that. So we're using prayer in a weird way, right? Mm-hmm. So how does the church stay that third rung? We have to have some way of maintaining independence in the midst of that, and yet we still want to have the symbols of God, in God we trust, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So how do we maintain that boundary?
Well, it's a question for the ages. What I would point out as part of several things to point out. One is that as long as there's tests, there'll always be prayer in schools. It's just that's a given.
Right.
But a prayer that gets reduced to a formality, that just gets rote recitation, That's not the nature of prayer. Who would want that? But for me, the better point is that history has shown when their church and the state are in that bear hug, the church is the loser.
Right.
The state co-opts now moral arguments for what it wants to do. And it can do that for free when it has silenced the dissenting voice because of the bear hug. That's a beautiful image that you can't be prophetic voice to when you're in that kind of close relationship. And so history has shown that when religion allows itself, and trust me, it allows itself, the state doesn't have to do anything other than just offer, oh, please come and be part of us. And the church just sort of stupidly walks into that. But rather to keep your distance, such that you can say both the positive and the negative. Bonhoeffer, this one of the magazine that you're holding is asking, is this a Bonhoeffer moment?
For the church, exactly. It's right on the cover of Sojourners magazine.
Because that's a great question, because that is, that's what Bonhoeffer was trying to do in the face of nationalized evil in Germany. You look at the conscientious objectors and the way in which they were so completely vilified prior to Vietnam. And now let's look back on it, now this 50 years later,
right,
with the Ken Burns documentary that's out and showing the way in which it was an unwinnable war, and we knew it, and we still sent people to death. And can we look back and say, maybe we should listen to the conscientious objector a little bit more rather than vilifying them? Same thing happened with the invasion into Iraq. Same thing. And now we're beating the drums with North Korea.
Seems to me
the mark of idiocy is to do the same thing over again and keep expecting a different result.
Exactly. And it seems that we don't learn from our conscience. It's almost like we go along with whatever the masses are pulling us or pushing us in. The powerful voices of the folks with influence and power, and then we're automatically just walking in goose step behind them. It's
oftentimes.
Oftentimes.
But see, every person, not to talk about nations for a moment, but a person. There's not a person listening to this program who has not had their conscience tell them one thing and they did something else anyway.
Right.
Every person has experienced that, and I'm right up there with you.
Cookie jars. Mom said, don't go in there.
And we've all done it. And so it's part of the task of maturing. It's part of the task of becoming not just physically mature, intellectually mature, emotionally mature, spiritually mature, to be able to listen to the uncomfortable voice. It behooves us to do that. We realize all too often late in life that maybe we should have. And nations are the same way. Sometimes they're not good at listening to the uncomfortable voice. And if the state has already made up its mind of what it wants to do, like for example with the invasion of Iraq, then they go out of their way to make sure that the uncomfortable voice is as quiet as can possibly be.
And by doing that, they maintain their semblance of
Well, they keep
power.
their power. They keep their power.
And that's a problem, isn't it? I mean, how does the church define power? Or a congregation. So when we have Jesus coming to talk about what the person on his right and left hand look like.
Yeah.
He says it's the servant among you who is going to maintain to have power. And so for us, you know, we talk about public service and servanthood, but do we really mean that? I mean, is humility really a virtue for a politician?
I think it certainly can be. Václav Havel of Czechoslovakia was certainly that way. A number of popes have been that way. We've had those kind of leaders in the past, and they've been fine ones. But this might sound trite, but I would link it to love. Mm-hmm. Being of a servant mindset, being able to say something awkward or difficult that emerges out of the conscience, being humble, all becomes easier if you are seriously a loving person. You are genuinely thinking about the other person and their welfare, or the other nation and their welfare. It sounds trite. It sounds like a platitude. But if we have love in our hearts, born of our recognition of being children of God, those kind of virtues are a natural outflow. And then they filter into things like nationalism and politics, et cetera.
And I remember when the ACA shooting happened, we had this song that we sang in the worship service after the shooting. It's "Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still."
Yeah, I remember that.
And it's a beautiful image for me for what the church is supposed to help our conscience do, is to expand, to include more and more people into our family, so that we all can emerge.
And those victims were Christian, Jewish, Islam, and the survivors became friends in many ways.
They did. Well, Art, it's been great having you on Encounter today.
My pleasure.
Welcome back. And for all of our listeners, I hope you have a great day and have a great Sunday.